He vanished the night she needed him most, leaving her bleeding, pregnant, and betrayed. Years later, her little boy is kidnapped, and the only man who can save him is the father who broke her heart. Once a ruthless mafia boss, now a ghost haunted by his sins, Lorenzo's past returns with vengeance, and a price that can only be paid in blood. As he fights through his own empire of enemies to save the son he never knew, one truth will shatter everything. Love might redeem him or destroy them all. But tell me, would you trust the man who once ruined your life to save the only thing you have left? Before we dive into today's emotional and thrilling journey, tell me in the comments, where are you watching me from, and what time is it there right now? I love knowing how far our stories travel around the world. Soft golden lights dripped from the chandeliers like melted stars, painting the ballroom in warmth and laughter. Laughter that didn't belong to her. Ava sat alone near the far corner of the grand hall, her hands resting lightly on the edge of her wine glass. Her deep brown eyes traced the dancing couples, the flashes of sequins and silk, the faces glowing with joy. A wedding, the kind of night she once dreamed of but now only watched from a distance. She adjusted the soft pink dress she'd borrowed from her friend, its fabric hugging her figure delicately but modestly. She looked radiant, yet sadness wrapped around her like invisible silk. Every smile she offered felt like a fragile mask, hiding the ache of memories she refused to revisit. It had been years since her husband left her and their newborn child. Years of struggle, of bills, of whispers from people who said she'd made bad choices. And yet, here she was, graceful, composed, and undeniably beautiful. Her hair fell in soft waves down her back, glowing under the chandelier light. She didn't know that every man in the room had already noticed her, except one, until he walked in. The moment he entered, the air seemed to shift. Lorenzo Moretti. The name alone could silence a room, but he didn't need an introduction. Every movement he made spoke power. He walked like a man who ruled not only the floor beneath him, but the hearts he chose to own. His black tailored suit wrapped around his strong frame like armor. Tattoos curled up his neck like whispers of danger. And those eyes, dark, unreadable, yet piercing enough to command attention. When his gaze fell upon Ava, it didn't drift away. It stayed. She felt it instantly. That electric pull that made her heart skip, her throat tighten. It wasn't admiration. It was something deeper, rawer, like a storm that had been waiting to break. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. Across the hall, the music swelled. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and yet for that brief second, the world quieted around them. Ava's breath hitched as his eyes lingered, tracing her face as if memorizing every curve, every uncertainty she tried to hide. She looked away, pretending to be occupied with her drink, but she could feel his presence growing stronger, closer. And then, he was there. The scent of expensive cologne and danger wrapped around her before she even lifted her gaze. "You don't belong in the shadows," he said softly, his voice rich and smooth, carrying a hint of command. Ava blinked, startled. "Excuse me?" He leaned slightly closer, his eyes scanning the crowd. "A woman like you shouldn't be sitting alone." Her pulse quickened. There was something hypnotic in his tone, a quiet authority that wasn't asking, it was telling. But before she could respond, another man approached, a guest, half drunk and far too bold. "Hey, beautiful," the man slurred, holding his glass with a cocky grin. "Didn't know angels could look this lonely." Ava forced a polite smile, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm fine, thank you." Before she could finish, Lorenzo stepped forward, his body blocking hers. The drunk man froze instantly, staring up at the tall figure now standing before him. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "She said she's fine," he murmured, his voice low, almost too calm. The man stammered, glancing nervously at the tattoos on Lorenzo's neck. I didn't mean anything, just walk away," Lorenzo said, not raising his tone. He didn't have to. The authority in his voice carried more weight than a gun ever could. The man stumbled back and disappeared into the crowd. Ava exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice trembling. Lorenzo turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't want him there," he replied simply. "Now he's gone." She frowned, studying him. "Who are you?" He looked at her for a long second, a half smile ghosting across his lips, dangerous and captivating all at once. "Someone you shouldn't be talking to," he said softly. "But here we are." Her chest rose and fell with unease. Something about him felt both magnetic and terrifying. "I don't even know your name." "Lorenzo," he said. "And tonight you don't need to know more than that." The music changed. Slower now, deeper. A romantic rhythm pulsing through the air. Couples filled the dance floor again, and Ava tried to turn away, but his hand caught hers. Firm, warm, commanding. "Dance with me," he murmured. "I can't. You can." His hand slid gently around her waist, drawing her closer. Her body tensed, but the moment his fingers brushed her skin, her resistance melted. It wasn't just his touch. It was the way he looked at her, as if he could see the walls she'd built and wanted to burn them down. They moved together in silence, the world around them fading into a blur. She could feel his breath near her ear, his heartbeat steady against her chest. "You're nervous," he whispered. "You're dangerous," she replied. He chuckled softly, a low, intoxicating sound. "So they say." For a fleeting moment, she forgot the rules she'd built for herself. The loneliness, the fear, it all disappeared in the heat of that dance. She hadn't felt wanted in years, not like this, not by someone who made her feel alive and terrified at once. When the music ended, he didn't let go. His gaze pinned her in place, dark and full of unspoken promises. "Why me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face. "Because you looked like you needed someone to remind you that you still matter." Her heart ached at those words. No one had said that to her in years. But before she could answer, he leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing her ear, and said the words that would change everything. "Act like you're mine tonight." Ava froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What?" "Just tonight," he murmured. "Smile when I look at you. Stay near me. Don't ask why." Her mind screamed no, but her heart, it whispered yes. Something in his tone, the control, the quiet danger, wrapped around her like a spell. She could feel the power radiating off him, but there was something else too, something broken. She finally nodded, barely. He smiled, slow, satisfied, like a man who always gets what he wants. "Good," he whispered, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "You'll be safe with me." She didn't understand why she believed him. Maybe it was the way his eyes softened for just a second, or how the chaos of the night seemed to bend around his presence. They sat together for the rest of the evening, talking in fragments, glancing at each other between the laughter of strangers. Every time someone looked at her, Lorenzo's hand would rest protectively on her chair, silently claiming her. The wedding was still alive with music, but for Ava, the world had narrowed down to one man, one pair of eyes that saw her differently. She didn't know who he truly was. She didn't know the empire of danger that shadowed his name. She just knew that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't invisible. The night deepened. The last song faded, and as the crowd began to leave, Lorenzo leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. Lorenzo took her hand, his voice dark and possessive. "From now on," he whispered, his lips brushing her skin, "no one touches what's mine." The ballroom was nearly empty now. The laughter had faded into distant murmurs, and the faint scent of champagne hung in the air like a lingering secret. Ava's heart still raced from his last words. "From now on, no one touches what's mine." She stared at Lorenzo, his dark eyes steady, unblinking. There was no smile this time, just a calm intensity that both frightened and drew her in. His hand still held hers, his thumb brushing against her pulse, slow, deliberate, possessive. The silence between them was heavy, charged, electric. "Come with me," he said softly. She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. "Where?" He tilted his head slightly, his lips curving faintly. "Someplace quiet, away from all this noise." Her instinct told her to say no. Her heart whispered something else. Against her better judgment, she followed him. They stepped out into the cool night. The city stretched beyond the glittering glass doors, alive and distant. Lorenzo's black car waited by the curb, its driver already gone. He opened the door for her, his eyes never leaving hers. Ava hesitated. She shouldn't. But something about him, that dangerous calm, that silent gravity, made it impossible to walk away. She stepped inside. The moment the car door closed, the world outside vanished. Inside, the hum of the engine was the only sound. Lorenzo loosened his tie, his movements unhurried, his gaze resting on her like fire. "You're quiet," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her fingers nervously brushing her dress. "You don't have to say anything." The car turned onto a quiet road, streetlights sliding over their faces in golden flashes. Ava felt his eyes on her, tracing her every breath, her every small movement. It wasn't lust alone. It was curiosity, fascination, a silent hunger for something he didn't understand. When they reached his penthouse, she froze at the sight. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows, marble floors, city lights shimmering far below, the kind of place that felt untouchable. Lorenzo walked ahead, his jacket sliding off his shoulders, revealing tattoos that wrapped around his skin like art carved in sin. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Do you want a drink?" "No," she whispered. "I should probably go." He nodded but stepped closer. "You can, or you can stay. You don't owe me anything, Ava." Her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. She hadn't told him her name. He must have asked around, or maybe he'd simply known. The way he said it made her feel seen, stripped bare. She met his eyes, searching for something human in the darkness. "You're used to getting what you want, aren't you?" He smiled faintly, leaning closer. "Usually, but tonight, I just want to forget what I am." The distance between them vanished. His hand brushed her cheek, the touch both gentle and commanding. Her breath hitched as his thumb traced the corner of her lips. She should have stepped back, but her body betrayed her. He kissed her, slow, deliberate, like a promise and a warning. Her heart pounded wildly as the kiss deepened, his hand sliding behind her neck, pulling her closer. The world outside disappeared. It was just him, his scent, his warmth, the danger wrapped in desire. Ava trembled under his touch. She had built walls around her heart for years, but his presence broke through them effortlessly. She wanted to hate him, to resist the pull, but every brush of his lips against her skin melted another piece of her resolve. Lorenzo wasn't gentle. He kissed her like a man who didn't know how to hold back, yet somehow, beneath the hunger, there was care, as if he was afraid of breaking her. The night became a blur of shadows and whispers, of trembling hands and stolen breaths. She felt alive for the first time in years, like fire had replaced her fear. At one point, she looked at him, breathless, and said, "Why me?" He paused, brushing his fingers along her jaw. "Because you're real," he whispered, "and I've lived too long surrounded by lies." His words sank into her like a confession. In his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected, not just desire, but longing, a piece of his soul fighting to be human again. They moved together in silence, guided not by logic, but by something raw, untamed. Every heartbeat felt like a rebellion against their worlds, hers of pain, his of violence. Later, when everything slowed and the city's lights dimmed into soft amber, Ava lay beside him, her head resting lightly on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady, powerful, alive. He stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. He wasn't used to stillness. He wasn't used to peace. But tonight, in her presence, he felt both. "You shouldn't trust me," he said quietly. "I don't," she replied, "but I can't stop wanting to." A flicker of a smile touched his lips, then faded. He turned his head to look at her, his eyes softer now, stripped of their usual steel. "I don't believe in love," he said after a moment. She traced her finger over the tattoos on his chest, her voice a whisper. "Maybe you just haven't met someone who made you want to." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because for the first time in years, her words scared him. The night stretched on, a tangle of heat and silence, of two broken souls daring to touch the forbidden. Ava drifted to sleep, wrapped in his warmth, unaware that her presence had already begun to change something in him. When morning came, soft light spilled across the penthouse floor. Ava stirred, the scent of him still clinging to her skin. She reached out. The space beside her was empty. Lorenzo was gone. On the pillow beside her lay a single red rose. Its petals glistened with dew, its stem carefully placed across a folded note. She unfolded it with trembling hands. "Until the world stops burning, remember this night." The words felt like a goodbye disguised as poetry. Her chest tightened, her throat burning with something she couldn't name. She didn't know why she felt the ache of loss. They had known each other for a single night, but it felt like losing something she'd never known she needed. She pressed the note to her chest, whispering to herself, "Don't be foolish, Ava. He's not yours." Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened, but for Ava, the night had changed everything. She didn't realize that for Lorenzo it had too, though he'd never admit it. Far away, in the back seat of his black car, Lorenzo sat in silence, staring out the tinted window. The city looked colder now, emptier. He rubbed his thumb against the faint red mark on his wrist, the memory of her touch. He told himself it was nothing, just another night, just another woman. But deep down, he knew he was lying. He reached for his phone to drown his thoughts in business, in control, in power, in the familiar weight of violence. The screen lit up. A private number flashed. He answered, his voice low. "What?" A pause. Then a voice, rough and mocking, cut through the line. "We know her name." His jaw tightened, his heart stopping mid-beat. Lorenzo froze, his knuckles whitening around the phone. "Say that again," he growled. The voice laughed. "The woman from the wedding, Ava." Silence. The line went dead, and for the first time in years, fear flickered in the heart of the Mafia boss. The words still echoed in Lorenzo's ear. "We know her name." A single phrase, sharp as a blade, slicing through the silence of his penthouse. He stood by the window, the city lights flickering across his face like ghosts of the life he'd chosen. Ava. Her name suddenly felt like a weakness, and Lorenzo Moretti had built his empire by never showing weakness. He tried to drown the thought in whiskey, the amber liquid burning his throat, but every sip only brought her image back clearer. Her smile soft and uncertain, the way she had looked at him like he was more than a man shaped by darkness. He clenched his jaw. He had told himself it was one night, just one, but her warmth had left marks deeper than any bullet wound. Down in the streets below, his men moved like shadows. They'd heard whispers, enemies watching, waiting. He ordered tighter security around his properties, no loose ends. Yet even as he commanded his world with that icy authority, his thoughts kept slipping back to her, to the woman who had no idea how dangerous her name had become. He told himself he wouldn't go near her, that it was safer that way, safer for her, safer for him. But the night felt colder without her voice echoing in his head. He tried to focus on his empire, on meetings filled with sharp suits and sharper lies. He signed deals, ignored calls, pretended to care about the numbers, but at every pause, every empty silence between words, there she was, a memory that refused to fade. Days passed, but peace never came. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, laughing softly, the way her fingers had traced the scars on his chest as if they were stories she wanted to understand. He hated how she made him feel human, because in his world, being human meant being weak. One night, he found himself parked outside her apartment. The rain was falling, steady and relentless, washing the city in silver light. He sat behind the tinted glass, his hand resting on the steering wheel, knuckles white. What was he doing here? He wasn't sure anymore. He told himself it was protection, that he was just watching to make sure no one followed her. But deep down, he knew that was a lie. He just needed to see her, even from a distance, even for a second. And then, through the window of her small apartment, he saw her. She was sitting on the couch, her hair loose, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her little boy was asleep in her arms. Lorenzo's chest tightened at the sight. That gentle image hit harder than any bullet ever could. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine it. A life that wasn't built on blood and secrets. A life where he could walk through her door, hold her without fear. But fantasy was dangerous for men like him. And love was a weapon. Then she looked up. Her eyes caught the movement of his car outside. At first she froze, confusion, then realization, and then anger. Ava stood up quickly, wrapping her robe tighter around her. The streetlight caught her face as she stepped out into the rain. Her bare feet slapped against the wet pavement. She walked straight to his car, fearless and furious. Lorenzo cursed under his breath. He rolled down the window, rain immediately spilling in, misting his face. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. "What are you doing here, Lorenzo?" He stared at her, her eyes blazing, her hair damp, lips trembling between rage and longing. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe," he said quietly. "Safe?" she echoed, stepping closer. "From what? You?" Her words hit him hard, sharper than a knife. He opened his mouth, but no excuse came, because she wasn't wrong. Ava folded her arms, her heart pounding. "Whatever this is between us, it can't happen," she whispered. He looked away, then back at her, eyes dark with something she couldn't name. "You think I don't know that?" he said softly. "You think I haven't tried to stay away?" The silence between them was charged, thick, electric. The rain poured harder, soaking her hair, sliding down his wrist, and still neither moved. Lorenzo stepped out of the car, the rain drenching his suit. He stood inches from her, his presence towering yet tender. "I don't want to hurt you, Ava," he said, voice low, "but I can't stop thinking about you." Her breath caught. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "I know." His hand lifted, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. Her skin burned beneath his touch. For a heartbeat, the world went still. The sound of rain faded. It was just them, two souls caught between danger and desire. He leaned closer, his forehead resting gently against hers. Her hands trembled, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. "You're trouble, Lorenzo," she murmured. He smiled faintly, a ghost of a grin. "And you're the first trouble I don't want to fix." Their lips met, slow at first, then hungry, desperate. It was a kiss born of everything they shouldn't feel. The cold night burned around them, and for a fleeting second, nothing else existed. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Her eyes searched his. "What happens now?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because in his world, there were no happy endings. He watched her turn and walk back inside, rain glistening on her skin like shattered stars. He stood there, drenched and lost, as if he'd just crossed a line he could never return from. Days later, Ava sat by her bathroom mirror, pale and trembling. The test in her hand shook. 2 pink lines stared back at her, clear and undeniable. Her breath caught in her throat, tears welling up in her eyes. Lorenzo's name whispered through her trembling lips. The room spun. Ava sank to the floor, clutching the test, whispering through broken breaths, "Oh my God, I'm pregnant." And somewhere across the city, under the glow of 1,000 lights, Lorenzo's phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. "Congratulations, Moretti. You just made your biggest mistake." The night she found out, the world went quiet. Ava sat on the edge of her bed, holding the small test in trembling hands. The tiny blue line stared back at her like a whisper from fate. Undeniable. Unchangeable. A life was growing inside her, a piece of the man who had turned her world upside down. Tears gathered in her eyes. Tears of confusion, of fear, of something she didn't dare call hope. She told herself she needed to be calm. She needed to tell him. Lorenzo deserved to know, even if he was chaos itself. She spent the night rehearsing what to say, how to soften the truth, how to reach the man buried under that armor of danger. But when morning came, his number rang endlessly, unanswered. The silence was heavier than any rejection. She drove to his mansion, but the iron gates were closed, the guards gone, and the scent of smoke hung in the air. Something had happened. She didn't know what, but she could feel it in her bones. The underworld had swallowed him. The whispers on the streets said a deal had gone wrong. Blood had been spilled. The name Moretti was suddenly spoken in fear, not admiration. Her heart refused to accept it. Lorenzo wasn't a man who disappeared. He dominated every room, every breath. Yet now he was nowhere. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of his absence settled like frost in her soul. The world moved on, but she couldn't. She placed her hand over her belly one night and whispered, "You'll never know your father, but I'll love you enough for both of us." The child inside her became her reason to breathe when everything else felt broken. Months passed. Her body changed, her life changed, her dreams changed. She worked late shifts at a small diner, the kind where coffee never stopped pouring and laughter tried to cover pain. Every time she saw a man in a suit or heard the sound of an expensive car engine, her heart jumped, only to crash into silence again. Lorenzo Moretti had become a ghost, and ghosts didn't come back. Then, one stormy night, she gave birth. The pain was unbearable. Yet in the middle of her screams came a cry softer than rain. Her baby boy. The moment she saw him, time stopped. Tiny hands, gray eyes, eyes just like his. Her tears fell on his forehead as she whispered, "Leo, my little lion." The months that followed were a mix of exhaustion and wonder. Ava learned to live again, one small heartbeat at a time. She smiled at the smallest things. The way Leo grabbed her finger, the way his laughter filled their small apartment. She found strength she never knew she had. She worked 2 jobs. She hid her pain behind tired smiles. She never spoke of Lorenzo again, not even to herself. Yet sometimes, late at night, she caught herself looking out the window, imagining his shadow on the street, his deep voice saying her name. Years went by like falling leaves. Leo grew into a curious, bright little boy. He had her heart and Lorenzo's defiance. He'd stare at the world like he was trying to conquer it, just like his father once did. When he smiled, she forgot everything. The pain, the betrayal, the empty nights. She had built a small, fragile peace until the night it shattered. It was past midnight. Rain tapped against the windows. Ava had just put Leo to bed, his toy cars scattered across the floor. She curled up on the couch, exhaustion pulling at her eyes. The city outside hummed quietly. For once, she felt calm. Then came the sound, a car screeching down the street. She frowned, half asleep. Moments later came the wail of police sirens, sharp, frantic, piercing the calm. Her heart started pounding. Something felt wrong. She stood, her pulse quickening. Through the window, she saw flashing red and blue lights painting the night. Her neighborhood was never this loud, never this alive at midnight. She turned toward Leo's room, instinctively calling his name. "Leo?" No answer. Her steps quickened. She opened the door and froze. The window was open. The curtain fluttered like a ghost in the wind. His bed was empty. Her breath vanished. "No, no, no, no." She ran to the window, shouting his name into the rain, her voice cracking. The street outside was chaos. People yelling, sirens blaring, shadows moving too fast to see. Her knees buckled as she gripped the window frame, terror flooding every inch of her. Her world, the only world she had left, was gone. Her baby had been taken. Across the city, under the cold glow of streetlights, Lorenzo Moretti sat in his car, years older, haunted eyes fixed on a photo flashing across his phone screen. A kidnapped child, gray eyes. He froze, his pulse hammering in disbelief. He whispered, voice trembling for the first time in years, "Dio mio, that's my son." The night was heavy with rain again, as if the sky itself mourned for something lost. Inside the black-tinted car parked beneath a flickering streetlight, Lorenzo Moretti sat frozen, his breath fogging the glass. The glow of his phone screen reflected against his sharp features, tattoos crawling up his neck like shadows of his sins. The headline burned across the screen, "5-year-old boy kidnapped from his home." At first, it was just another piece of bad news in a city full of violence and broken souls. But then the camera shifted, showing a picture of the missing child. The boy's smile was soft. His curls were messy. But those eyes, those gray, storm-filled eyes, hit Lorenzo like a bullet to the heart. His phone nearly slipped from his hands. He leaned closer to the screen, as if the world might be lying to him. But no, the truth was merciless. That child. He looked exactly like him. The room inside his chest went silent. His throat tightened. For the first time in years, Lorenzo Moretti, the man who ruled empires of blood and power, felt his hands tremble. He tried to dismiss it, tried to breathe. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he was imagining things. But deep inside, something whispered, "You know the truth already." He turned off the screen, but the image refused to leave his mind. Those eyes followed him into the darkness like ghosts demanding to be recognized. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, his usual medicine for guilt. But it didn't burn away the ache. It only made it worse. The room felt colder, lonelier. Memories began to crawl out of the corners. The laughter of a woman with golden brown hair, the warmth of a touch he'd spent years pretending to forget, the night he left without a word. Ava. He said her name out loud, and it hurt more than a bullet ever could. He tried to remember that night. The deal gone wrong, the chaos, the sirens, the betrayal that forced him underground. He'd told himself she was safer without him, that he was doing her a favor. But seeing that child's face, it shattered every lie he'd built to survive. He sat back in his chair, running his hand through his slick hair, eyes lost in thought. The more he stared at the boy's picture, the more the walls around his heart began to crack. He could almost hear the echo of Ava's laughter, the way her voice softened when she said his name. He slammed the whiskey glass on the table, liquid spilling over his papers. He couldn't sit still anymore. He needed answers. The next morning, his penthouse filled with the hum of computers and men typing frantically. He had his best hackers trace the origin of the news, the neighborhood, the reports. When one of his men handed him a printed document, the name of the mother, his world stopped again. Ava Morgan. The name burned through him. The air felt thin. All these years he'd convinced himself she had moved on, that what they shared was just a fleeting sin. But now, the universe was dragging him back to her, through pain, through blood, through destiny itself. He opened a locked drawer. Inside lay an old photo. Ava smiling at him in the dim light of his penthouse, hair tangled, eyes full of trust. He hadn't looked at it in years. He had promised himself he never would. But now, her face was the only thing keeping him breathing. He slammed the drawer shut and grabbed his keys. His men tried to stop him, asking where he was going, but he ignored them. No one could stop him now. Not his guards, not his enemies, not even his past. He drove through the rain like a man possessed. Every streetlight flickered against the hood of his black car as he sped across the city. His mind raced with questions. Was Leo really his son? Did Ava ever forgive him? Was it too late to protect them both? He parked outside her small apartment complex, the kind of place where life was fragile but real, the kind of place where he never imagined she'd end up. Yet it felt so much like her, warm, humble, full of quiet pain. He stood at her door for a long time, rain dripping from his coat, his pulse hammering. What could he even say after all this time? I'm sorry felt too small. I love you felt too late. Still, he raised his hand and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Inside, footsteps echoed faintly. He heard a familiar voice through the door. Cautious, tired, trembling. Who's there? His throat tightened. Her voice. After all these years. He closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to speak. It's me. The door creaked open just enough for her eyes to meet his. Those same eyes that once burned with love and fury. Ava stood frozen, disbelief painted across her face. Her body tensed, her breath caught, her heart unsure whether to hate him or fall apart right there. Lorenzo, she whispered, barely breathing the name. He looked at her. Really looked. At the dark circles under her eyes, the trembling hands clutching the edge of the door, the grief etched into every corner of her face. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to hold her. But the only thing that came out was a hoarse whisper. Where is he? Her lips trembled. You saw the news. I did, he said quietly, and I saw his eyes. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. You have no right to be here. He stepped closer, his voice low, shaking with something deeper than anger. You kept him from me. She flinched, as if the words themselves were knives. You left us, Lorenzo. You chose your world over mine. You don't get to act like you care now. The silence that followed was sharp, unbearable. The rain outside grew heavier, like the world itself was watching their storm unfold again. He took another step, his eyes never leaving hers. His voice broke slightly as he said the words that had been clawing at his throat since the night he saw that photo. Tell me the truth, Ava. She swallowed hard, tears running freely now. What truth? He leaned closer, his jaw tense, his eyes burning. The boy in that photo, he whispered. He's my son, isn't he? Ava's hand trembles on the door. Her silence screams louder than words. Then, as thunder crashes outside, a single tear falls down her cheek. She whispers, barely audible, "Yes, he's yours." For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Ava's whisper still hung in the air, soft yet sharp enough to pierce Lorenzo's soul. "Yes, he's yours." Lorenzo stood frozen, unable to breathe. Every sound and the rain against the window, the distant thunder, faded beneath the weight of those words. His son, his blood, the life he never knew he had. He took a hesitant step closer, his voice barely holding together. Ava. But before he could say another word, her hand cut through the air and landed hard against his cheek. The sound echoed through the room like lightning splitting the sky. Her tears followed instantly, but her anger burned hotter than fire. You don't get to call him yours after what you did. He didn't move, He didn't defend himself. The slap stung, but not half as much as her words. He had faced gunfire, betrayal, and death, but nothing ever hurt like this. "I know," he said quietly, eyes lowered. "I don't deserve him. Or you." She laughed bitterly, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare pretend you care now. You disappeared, Lorenzo. You left us in the ashes of your world." He looked up then, his dark eyes glistening with guilt. "I thought leaving would keep you safe. The night I vanished, they were after me, after everything I touched. I didn't want them to touch you." Ava shook her head, stepping back as if distance could protect her from the gravity of him. "And yet here we are. My child is gone. Your world found me anyway." Her voice cracked on the word "my," and he felt the pain twist inside him like a knife. "He's our son," he said quietly, but she flinched as if those words were poison. "You don't get to say our anymore." Silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating, intimate. The rain drummed against the window and thunder rolled like an old wound reopening. Lorenzo took a deep breath, his voice trembling with something rare. Vulnerability. "Ava, I'll get him back. I swear on my life." Her eyes met his, suspicious, cold, yet searching. "You can't swear on a life you already threw away." He stepped closer, his tone firmer now. "I've done terrible things. I've hurt people, destroyed families. But this, losing him, this is the one thing I can't live with." For the first time, Ava saw something shift in his eyes. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who once commanded fear with a glance, looked broken, human, a father. Her tears softened, her anger fighting against the small voice in her heart that still remembered how he once made her feel alive. "You're serious?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "More than I've ever been." Ava wrapped her arms around herself, shaking. "I don't trust you, Lorenzo." He met her gaze. "Then hate me later. Right now, help me find him." Her heart twisted painfully. Logic screamed no, but a mother's instinct didn't listen to logic. If there was even a chance he could help find her baby, she couldn't turn it down. She closed her eyes for a moment, then whispered, "Fine. But if you hurt him, or me, I'll finish what your enemies couldn't." Lorenzo almost smiled, not in arrogance, but in respect. "That's the woman I fell in love with." She looked at him sharply. "Don't." He raised his hands in surrender. "Fair enough." They left the apartment together, stepping into the rain. The city glowed under streetlights, reflections shimmering in puddles as thunder rolled overhead. The air was thick with danger and memory. Ava followed him to his black car, hesitating before getting in. The last time she'd been near him, it led to heartbreak and a lifetime of pain. But tonight, she was no longer a woman in love. She was a mother on a mission. As the car pulled into the night, she glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, jaw clenched, eyes locked forward. This wasn't the same man who once played God in a world of crime. This was someone desperate, someone who had everything to lose for once. They drove through alleys, old docks, and dim back streets, places where his name still carried weight. Every contact, every old ally, every whisper from his dark empire was now being used for one purpose: to find Leo. Ava watched in silent shock as his world unfolded. The coded conversations, the dangerous men who flinched at his presence, the unspoken fear he commanded. She hated how it both frightened and reassured her. Late that night, they stopped at a warehouse. One of Lorenzo's men handed him a phone. "We traced a signal, maybe from the kidnappers, but it's distorted." Ava's heart skipped. Distorted? Before the man could answer, the phone in Lorenzo's hand buzzed. A private number, no location, just a voice. Low, distorted, mechanical. "Lorenzo Moretti," it said. "We didn't think you'd care about the boy." His grip tightened. "If you touch him..." The voice interrupted, laughing coldly. "If you want your son alive, come alone." The call ended. Ava looked at him, panic flooding her face. What did they say? He didn't answer immediately. His jaw locked, eyes dark as midnight. He turned toward her slowly, rain dripping from his coat, his expression carved with dread. "They want me to come. Alone." She shook her head instantly. "No, it's a trap." "I know. Then don't go." "I have to." His voice was quiet but final, the kind of voice that didn't leave room for argument. Ava stepped closer, her eyes fierce through her tears. "You leave me again, Lorenzo, and this time I swear, if they don't kill you, I will." He looked at her, a faint ghost of sorrow in his eyes. "If I don't go, we lose him forever." Her heart trembled. She hated him. She loved him. She didn't know which was worse. He brushed a thumb across her cheek, not in romance, but in silent apology, and whispered, "Take care of yourself, Ava." Before she could stop him, he turned toward the door, his coat sweeping behind him like a shadow returning to its darkness. As Lorenzo stepped into the storm, thunder cracked across the sky. His phone buzzed again. A new message. A single photo appeared on the screen. Leo, blindfolded, crying. And beneath it, 4 words that froze his blood. "You're already too late." The call ended, leaving the room heavy with silence. Ava's heart pounded so violently she could hear it echoing inside her chest. Lorenzo stood frozen, phone still in his hand, the glow of the screen casting shadows over his jawline. For a long moment, he didn't say a word. The calm, confident Mafia boss she once knew looked shaken, haunted. Ava stepped closer, her voice trembling but sharp. "What did they say?" Lorenzo's eyes lifted slowly, dark with something between fury and fear. "They want me alone," he said quietly, each word dripping with tension. "If I bring anyone else, they'll kill him." Ava's knees went weak, and she grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "No," she whispered. "They'll kill you too. You can't trust them." Lorenzo's gaze hardened, that familiar cold steel sliding back into his expression. "I've lived my whole life not trusting anyone. But this," his voice cracked slightly, surprising even him. "This is my son. I can't risk him." Ava's eyes glistened with tears, her throat tight. "He's our son," she corrected softly. "You think I'll let you walk into death alone?" He turned away, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You don't understand the people behind this," he muttered. "They don't negotiate. They destroy. They'll use him to break me." Ava's fear turned into defiance. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. "Then let me break them first." Lorenzo looked down at her, at this woman who had once been his weakness. And for the first time in years, he felt something crack inside him. "You still have fire," he murmured. "I thought I killed that when I walked away." Ava's voice shook but stayed strong. "You almost did." But he kept it alive. Every smile, every word he said. He reminded me that love can't be erased. The confession hit him harder than a bullet. His jaw flexed. He wanted to say he was sorry. Not in the way he had before, not as a man trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, but as someone who finally understood the gravity of his sins. Instead, he turned away, because emotion was dangerous in his world. "I'll go alone," he said firmly. "If I die, they'll let him live." Ava stepped forward, fire flashing in her tear-filled eyes. "Don't you dare leave me again, Lorenzo." Her words stopped him cold. The silence between them pulsed like electricity. Then, without thinking, she pressed her hands to his chest. "You owe me the truth," she whispered. "Who are they?" He hesitated, but when her tears fell against his fingers, he spoke. "The Calvaris," he said darkly. "Old rivals. I burned their empire years ago. They've been waiting for revenge, and they found my weakness." Ava's lip quivered. "Our son," she breathed. "They're using him to destroy you." Lorenzo nodded slowly, his eyes distant. And they will, unless I destroy them first. She looked up at him, seeing the shadow of the man she once loved, the monster the world feared, and the father she hoped he could become, all trapped in one broken soul. Then we do this together, she said. He shook his head. No, Ava, you're not built for this world. She took a step closer, her tone soft but unyielding. I was built for my son. The air grew heavy between them. Lorenzo's breath hitched as her words pierced through his icy exterior. He could see the same determination in her that he saw in himself when he started in this bloody empire. The hunger to protect what mattered. He reached up and brushed away her tears, his rough fingertips trembling slightly. You'll stay behind, he said quietly. I'll send my men to guard you. She stared at him, shaking her head in disbelief. You still don't get it. If you go alone, they'll kill you and him both. You need me. You need someone who knows what love looks like, because that's something they can't predict. For the first time, Lorenzo couldn't argue. He turned his back, fists clenching. We move tonight, he said finally. Ava exhaled sharply, relief and terror intertwining inside her. She grabbed her jacket and followed him out the door. The night outside was heavy with mist, the city lights blurred through rain. As they got into his car, the silence felt alive, filled with everything unsaid. Driving through the darkness, Ava stared out the window. Her mind replayed every memory. Leo's laughter, the sound of his small feet running through their apartment, his favorite bedtime story. Her chest ached. What if we're too late? She whispered. Lorenzo didn't answer. His jaw was locked, his hand gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. We won't be, he said finally, his voice a low promise. I won't lose him. She turned to him, studying the side of his face illuminated by the passing streetlights. There was something fragile beneath the ruthless exterior, a man terrified of failure. She wanted to reach for his hand but stopped herself. There was too much history between them, too many broken promises. Yet in that moment she realized she still cared. Maybe she always would. The car came to a stop in front of a dark, abandoned warehouse at the edge of the city. Rain fell harder now, tapping against the windshield like a warning. Lorenzo pulled out a gun from his holster and checked it mechanically. Ava's stomach twisted. Lorenzo, what if they know you're coming? He looked at her, his gaze softening just enough to make her heart skip. Then I'll make sure they regret it. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. Leo's. She placed it in his hand. Bring it back to him, she whispered. Lorenzo closed his fist around it, his expression unreadable. I will. He opened the car door, the rain soaking his black suit instantly. Ava followed, ignoring his protest. You're not going in there without me. He turned, water dripping down his face, and for a heartbeat they stood inches apart, lightning flashing behind them. Fine, he muttered, but stay close. They crept toward the warehouse, their footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. Inside, dim lights flickered, revealing shadows that moved like ghosts. Ava's breath hitched when she saw a small shoe near the corner, Leo's. Her heart nearly stopped. Lorenzo, she whispered, pointing. He followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. Somewhere in the darkness, a voice echoed, distorted, mocking. Welcome, Moretti. You brought company. How touching. Lorenzo froze, scanning the shadows. Ava's pulse raced, fear curling up her spine. The voice laughed, low and cruel. Too bad your reunion ends tonight. A single gunshot rang out, and Ava screamed as Lorenzo fell to his knees, blood blooming across his chest under the cold, flickering light. Ava's scream cut through the night like a blade, echoing off the concrete walls of the warehouse. She dropped to her knees beside Lorenzo, her trembling hands pressing against the warm blood seeping through his shirt. The metallic scent filled the air, mixing with rain and smoke. Lorenzo, stay with me, she cried, her voice breaking. his head tilted toward her, eyes half open, pain flickering behind them. But even then, he gave her that same crooked smirk that once made her weak. "I'm fine," he lied through gritted teeth. "Just a scratch." Her tears fell onto his chest as she tried to steady the bleeding. "You idiot," she whispered. "Why didn't you listen to me?" He coughed, a drop of blood staining his lip. "Because I'm not used to taking orders from anyone," he muttered. "Especially not from the only woman who ever scared me." She wanted to scream at him, to shake him until he understood what he meant to her. But all she could do was hold him tighter as footsteps echoed closer in the shadows. "Stay down," he rasped, reaching for his gun. She pushed his hand away. "You're not in any condition." Before she could finish, another shot rang out, striking the wall inches from her head. She gasped and ducked low, her heart slamming against her ribs. A voice boomed from above, cold and amused. "Oh, look who we have here, the little mother who raised a Mafia heir." Ava froze. Her stomach turned to ice. "Where is my son?" she screamed. The voice chuckled. "Safe. For now." Lorenzo's fingers wrapped around hers, weak but steady. "Don't let them see your fear," he whispered. "That's how they win." Ava swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe through the terror. Her mind spun. Leo was somewhere in this nightmare, scared and alone. She had no choice. She had to fight. From the shadows, two men emerged, armed, faces hidden behind black masks. One dragged a chair forward, the other motioned toward Lorenzo. "Get him up," the masked man ordered. "The boss wants to see the legend before he dies." Ava's chest tightened. "No," she whispered, stepping between them. "If you touch him, I swear I'll—" The man laughed, raising his gun. "You'll what? Cry?" Lorenzo's hand shot up faster than anyone expected. He fired once, hitting the gunman's shoulder. The man dropped his weapon, screaming. Ava flinched as Lorenzo pushed himself to his feet, breathing heavily, blood staining his jacket. "You picked the wrong night to test me," he growled, his voice low and feral. The other man lunged, but Ava grabbed a broken metal rod from the floor and swung it with all her strength. It cracked against his arm, sending him sprawling. For a brief, breathless moment, silence fell again, except for the rain hammering the roof. Lorenzo turned to her, eyes dark but burning with pride. "You fight like hell," he said softly. Ava panted, trembling, gripping the rod. "You taught me that without meaning to." Then, from deeper in the warehouse, a small cry echoed. It was faint but unmistakable. "Mommy!" Ava froze. Her heart stopped, and her body moved before her brain could catch up. She ran toward the sound, ignoring Lorenzo's warning shout. Her footsteps splashed through puddles as she darted between stacks of crates, calling out, "Leo, baby, I'm here!" She turned a corner, and there he was, Leo. His tiny wrists bound, a strip of duct tape over his mouth, tears streaking down his dirt-covered cheeks. Ava's knees nearly buckled from relief. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, rushing to him. But before she could reach him, a shadow stepped out behind the boy, tall, dressed in black, a pistol pressed against Leo's head. "Move another inch and the kid dies," the man said coldly. Ava froze mid-step, hands trembling in the air. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's just a child." The man smirked. "That's exactly why he's useful." Behind her, Lorenzo's voice thundered across the room. "Let him go." The man laughed without turning. "Lorenzo Moretti, the devil himself, you finally look human, bleeding, desperate, weak." Lorenzo's jaw clenched. "You have no idea what weak looks like." Ava's tears blurred her vision. Every muscle in her body screamed to run to Leo, but she knew one wrong move would end everything. The man tilted his head. "You ruined my brother's life, Moretti. You burned everything we built. Now I'll burn yours." Lorenzo raised his gun slowly, despite his injury. "Then let's end it," he said coldly. The man laughed again. "With pleasure." He tightened his grip on Leo, who whimpered beneath the tape. Ava's heart shattered. "No!" she cried. "Please, not him! Take me instead!" The man's eyes gleamed. "Maybe I will." He shoved Leo aside, grabbed Ava by the hair, and dragged her backward. Lorenzo fired instantly, but the bullet whizzed past, hitting a crate. The man pressed his gun against Ava's temple, his voice low. "Drop it, or she dies." Lorenzo froze, his weapon still raised. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. He looked at Ava, and she saw it in his eyes. The guilt, the fear, the love. "Don't," she mouthed silently. He shook his head slowly. "I won't lose you again." The man sneered, touching, but words won't save her. He began pulling Ava backward toward a set of stairs. Lorenzo's blood dripped onto the floor, his strength fading fast. But then he noticed something, a reflection in a puddle behind the kidnapper. A second man creeping up with another weapon, aiming for Ava's back. Without thinking, Lorenzo lunged forward, firing twice. One bullet hit the hidden man, the other grazed the captor's arm, forcing him to release Ava. Ava dropped to the floor, gasping. Lorenzo stumbled, clutching his side. "Run," he growled. "Take Leo." She scrambled to her feet, rushing to her son and tearing off the tape. Leo sobbed, wrapping his arms around her neck. "Mommy, I was scared," he whispered. "I know, baby, I know," she said, kissing his hair. Gunfire erupted behind them. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal beams. Ava ducked, shielding Leo. Lorenzo moved like a man possessed, firing at every shadow that moved. But his body was failing him. His hand shook, his breaths grew shallow. Still, he didn't stop. Ava grabbed Leo's hand and pulled him toward the exit. "Lorenzo, come on," she shouted, but he didn't answer. He stood there, back straight, eyes locked on the last remaining gunman approaching from the smoke. The man raised his weapon, smirking. Ava's scream tore through the air. "Lorenzo!" Lorenzo turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes one last time. The rain poured harder. Thunder rumbling like a war drum. "Go," he mouthed. She didn't move. "I'm not leaving you," she cried. The man's gun fired, once, twice. Lorenzo staggered back, but before the third shot could come, he fired his last bullet, dropping the gunman for good. The silence afterward was unbearable. Ava rushed to him, holding Leo close with one arm and pressing her other hand against his chest. "No, no, no," she whispered, tears falling freely. His eyes fluttered open, weak but soft. "You found him," he murmured. She nodded, sobbing. "We found him together." Lorenzo smiled faintly, his voice barely a whisper. "Then my fight's done." As Ava begged him to stay awake, another shadow stepped out from behind the crates, a familiar face grinning in the dim light. "You really thought it was over, Moretti?" the rival said, cocking his gun. "Round 2 begins now." The rival's grin widened as thunder cracked overhead, lightning slicing the darkness into shards of silver and smoke. Ava froze, clutching Leo tight against her chest, her eyes darting between the two men. Lorenzo stood unsteady, blood soaking through his shirt, yet his presence was unshaken, raw, dangerous, unyielding. "You should have stayed dead," the rival hissed, stepping closer. "But you never knew when to quit, did you?" Lorenzo wiped blood from his lip with the back of his hand, his gaze cold. "You talk too much," he muttered, raising his gun. A shot exploded through the air. Metal screamed, sparks flew, and chaos began again. Lorenzo lunged sideways, firing back with precision born of rage and desperation. Bullets tore through crates, shattering wood and scattering sparks into the air. Ava ducked, dragging Leo behind cover, her heart pounding so violently it hurt to breathe. The rival's men burst in from both sides, armed, ruthless, faces hidden behind black masks. It was an ambush. Lorenzo fired until his gun clicked empty, then threw it aside and grabbed another from the fallen. His movements were sharp, brutal, almost animal. Every pull of the trigger carried the weight of 6 years of regret. Every drop of blood spilled felt like penance for what he'd done to Ava. Ava wasn't hiding anymore. She found a pistol lying beside a body, her hands trembling as she lifted it. For years, fear had ruled her. But not tonight. Tonight, she was a mother fighting for her child. Her first shot missed, but the second hit. The man fell. She gasped, shocked at her own strength, but Lorenzo's brief glance of pride gave her courage. "Stay close to me!" he shouted over the roar of gunfire. Ava nodded, her eyes fierce through the tears. She clutched Leo's hand tightly, shielding him from the nightmare unfolding around them. The warehouse burned with chaos. Smoke filled the air, alarms blared in the distance. The rival circled from behind, laughing through the madness. "You always thought you could protect everyone, Moretti," he taunted. "But the truth is you destroy everything you touch." Lorenzo turned slowly, his chest rising and falling like a man standing at the edge of his own redemption. "You're right," he said, "but not this time." They collided in a brutal fight. Fists, knives, rage. The sound of metal and bone echoed off the concrete walls. Ava screamed for him, but the men were locked in a storm of fury. Lorenzo's body ached with pain. His vision blurred from blood loss, but the thought of Leo, of that tiny boy with his eyes, kept him standing. The rival slashed his arm, drew blood, and sneered. "You can't save her. You can't save any of them." Lorenzo's voice was a growl. "Watch me." He drove his knee into the man's ribs, twisting his wrist until the knife clattered to the floor. They grappled, sweat and rain mixing with blood. Ava watched helplessly, tears streaming as she shielded Leo behind a crate. "Stop it, please," she cried, but neither of them heard. Then, a gunshot. Ava flinched, her heart stopping. For a second, silence hung in the air like fog. Then the rival staggered backward, eyes wide, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. He looked down at the wound, disbelief frozen on his face. Behind him, Lorenzo stood shaking, gun smoking in his hand. "You don't touch my family," Lorenzo rasped. The rival collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Ava rushed to him, grabbing his face in her hands. "Lorenzo, are you okay?" He tried to smile, but winced instead. "I've been better," he muttered. "You and that mouth of yours always get me shot at." She laughed through tears, pressing her forehead against his. "You're impossible." He chuckled weakly. "You love it." But their small moment of peace shattered when Leo screamed, "Mommy!" Ava turned just in time to see one of the rival's men crawling from behind a pile of crates, his gun raised, aiming straight for her. Time slowed. The shot fired. Lorenzo moved faster than thought, throwing himself in front of her. The bullet hit him square in the chest. The sound tore through Ava like thunder. "No!" she screamed, catching him as he fell. His body was heavy, his breathing shallow, blood staining her hands, her dress, everything. She pressed her palms to the wound, sobbing. "Stay with me, please, stay with me." Lorenzo's eyes met hers, softer now, fading, filled with something she hadn't seen before. Peace. You were right," he whispered. "About what?" she cried, her voice trembling. "That love makes you weak," he said faintly, his lips curling into a sad smile. "But I finally learned. It's the only thing worth being weak for." Ava shook her head, tears falling onto his face. "Don't say that. You're going to see Leo grow up. You're going to—" He coughed, cutting her off, his blood warm against her hands. "Tell him. His father finally learned how to love." Her heart broke in two. "Lorenzo, please, don't—" He lifted his hand, brushing her cheek one last time. "Ava," he whispered, "you saved me." Then his hand fell. For a moment, everything was silent. The gunfire, the rain, the world itself. Ava's sobs filled the emptiness. She held him tightly, rocking back and forth, her tears mixing with the blood on his chest. Leo clung to her side, crying softly. not fully understanding, only knowing something was terribly wrong. The sirens grew louder, flashing lights piercing the smoke. Police cars screeched outside, officers shouting commands. Ava looked up, her hair plastered to her face with rain and sweat. She didn't move. She couldn't. She pressed her forehead to Lorenzo's chest, whispering, "You promised you wouldn't leave again." His hand, limp and blood-stained, slipped from hers and hit the ground with a soft, final thud. The rain poured harder, washing the blood across the concrete like the world itself was mourning. Ava screamed his name into the night as the police burst through the doors. A hand touched her shoulder. But when she looked down again, Lorenzo's body was gone. Only the pool of blood remained. The sound of heart monitors was the only rhythm in the room. Steady, fragile, alive. Ava sat frozen beside the hospital bed, her trembling hand clutching Lorenzo's cold fingers. For days she had prayed without words, her tears becoming her only language. The man who once terrified the city now lay still, stripped of his power, stripped of his mask, only a man broken and breathing. The bandages across his chest told stories of bullets and redemption, each one a symbol of pain finally earned for love, not pride. Leo, too young to understand death, sat curled on the armchair, his little head resting against Ava's lap. Every once in a while, he'd lift his sleepy eyes and whisper, "Mommy, is Daddy going to wake up today?" And every time, Ava would press her lips to his forehead and say softly, "He's trying, baby. He's trying so hard." Outside, the rain fell against the window. Soft, cleansing, endless. It was the same rain that had washed away the blood that night. Hours became days. The world outside moved on, but Ava's world had shrunk to this sterile room, a room where time had no meaning. She watched the man she loved drift between life and the void, his body fighting battles his soul had already surrendered to. She thought of the nights they had screamed at each other, of the words she couldn't take back, and of the love she tried to bury under anger. But love, real love, never dies. It just hides behind pride until pain pulls it out again. Then, one morning, the impossible happened. Lorenzo's fingers twitched. Ava froze. She leaned closer, holding her breath. "Lorenzo," she whispered, voice trembling. His eyelids fluttered, heavy, slow. And then, those stormy gray eyes finally opened. For a moment, confusion filled them, like he was caught between two worlds. Then his gaze found her, and everything stopped. He tried to speak, but his voice came out cracked, a whisper of a man once fierce. "Ava?" She nodded, tears spilling freely. "I'm here," she breathed, gripping his hand tighter. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "You didn't leave." "I couldn't," she said softly. "Not again." He blinked, slow and pained. "Leo?" Ava motioned toward the sleeping boy in the chair. "He's right there, safe." Lorenzo's eyes filled. Something rare, something real. He stared at his son, the small boy with eyes just like his. The guilt in his chest hit harder than any bullet ever could. "I almost lost him." "Again," he whispered. Ava reached up, brushing his cheek gently. "But you didn't. You came back for him. You came back for us." Weeks passed. Recovery was slow, grueling. Every step Lorenzo took down the hospital hallway felt like dragging years of sins behind him. But with every breath, every heartbeat, he felt something new. Peace. For the first time, he didn't crave control or revenge. He just wanted to live. To wake up and see Leo's messy hair in the mornings, to hear Ava's laughter in the kitchen, to have something pure to protect. The empire he once built from blood and fear was gone, erased by the same men who once served him. But he didn't care. For the first time, losing everything didn't feel like death. It felt like freedom. One evening, after the sun dipped low and painted the hospital walls gold, Lorenzo called Ava to his side. She came quietly, as she always did, her heart still unsure where to place the boundaries between forgiveness and love. He looked at her for a long time, his eyes soft but heavy with truth. "I don't have diamonds or promises," he began quietly. She tilted her head, unsure. He took her hand, pressing it to his chest, over the scars that nearly took his life. "What I have left is this heartbeat," he whispered. "And if you'll let me, I want to spend every one of them making up for the years I destroyed." Ava's breath caught. The sincerity in his tone shattered every wall she had built. For a moment she said nothing. Then she smiled faintly, that soft, trembling smile that once made him forget who he was. "You already started," she whispered. "You came back." A single tear slid down his cheek. "Then let me stay." She nodded, her hand trembling against his. "Stay." And with that word, a lifetime of pain found its peace. Days later, Lorenzo was discharged. The three of them, a mother, a father, a son, walked out of the hospital hand in hand. The world outside seemed different now, brighter, quieter, kinder. They didn't return to mansions or guards or money. They moved into a small coastal home where the sea met the sunrise. Ava started painting again. Leo spent his days chasing seagulls and laughing freely. And Lorenzo? He spent his mornings watching them, silently thanking the universe for one more chance. Sometimes Ava would catch him staring at her, that same intense stare that once terrified everyone. But now it carried something else: softness, awe, regret. One night, as they stood on the balcony watching the moon reflect over the ocean, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "You changed," she whispered. He exhaled deeply, fingers brushing through her hair. "You saved me." "No," she said quietly. "You saved yourself. I just refused to let go." He smiled faintly. "You always were stubborn," she laughed softly. "And you always loved that about me." Their laughter faded into silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Lorenzo looked toward the horizon, where the first rays of dawn began to rise.